Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Deer Gear Podcast. In today's episode, I am joined again by Dorge from Firenock and Dave Murray from Vital Limits. This is the last episode that I was able to record in person with Dave and Dorge from the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg back in February. And today's aero-specific topic is vanes. Vanes are an extremely technical component to your arrow. And in Dorge's words, they are the most important part of your arrow for hunters to understand. So I suggest paying close attention to what Dorge has to say about your aerovanes. There's actually going to be 2 episodes coming from aerovanes. This first one here, and then in a couple weeks you'll have another one which talks more about helicals, offsets, wraps, all the current trends in building arrows. So for this episode, we're just laying out the groundworks of vanes, what you need to know. Most importantly, lift versus drag, a traditional style vane versus an airfoil vane, and much, much more. So there's some really great information in this podcast. I hope you guys are getting some value out of these podcasts. I know I am learning a ton, and it has me rethinking my entire bow and arrow setup, but it has me excited to finally get the most performance possible out of my setup. So without further ado, let's hop into today's podcast. All right, everyone, back. This is episode number 3 from the Great American Outdoor Show with Dorge, and we have a familiar voice and an unfamiliar face today. We have Dave Murray back with us, and today's conversation is we're moving on to in Dorge's words, the most important thing for a bow hunter to understand, aerovanes.
Yes, the vanes of an arrow. Well, most people never thought, let me sort of put it this way. In most cases, when you deal with an arrow flight, if you don't have vanes, that arrow is technically a spear projectile. The moment we get vanes is where we make it into an arrow. Vanes is a very misunderstood thing. Let me sort of get a few things. Well, people will be shooting quote-unquote arrow with feathers since the beginning of time. I will quote Professor Selig one quote that will sort of remind me how important vane is. People say, that's what he quotes, birds do not fly with feathers, birds fly with wings. And second, there is no bird we know on this planet will fly over 89 miles per hour. Our current crossbow arrows, just like the Raven E500, the 10.505, is traveling over 300 miles per hour. So let that sink in a little bit. Then we can begin to talk about vanes. So let me sort of bring back the history, a little bit about history of vanes. They're called feathers because back then the arrow is superbly inconsistent, and we never actually go over 250 feet per second. That's pretty much, none of the recurve can possibly do that. We're actually passing 220, you're lucky. When Derr made the Delta V, the first bow ever passing 300 feet per second, when the Delta V was made, a lot of things was not known. And remember, that's a 50% let-off bow. And I want to bring back a few things. Feather using as the guidance of an arrow is valid all the way up to about 260 to 270 feet per second. After that, feather is technically useless. No, I will take it back. Feather is ineffective until the speed drops down to that range. So if you decided to use feather on your recurve, it's absolutely the best thing you can do because it have the best performance on weight and steering and recovery. The modern vanes is not, the modern vanes can be considered as the time when Blazer comes out, when Quickspin comes out, when you're Duravane, the AAE, and so on. Yes, every one of them is vane. The only one come close to a little bit aerodynamic conditions is the Quickspin. Unfortunately, with my research and also with explanation from quote-unquote, the best aerodynamic mind on this planet. I'm talking about Professor Lele of Stanford University, Professor Selig of Central Illinois University, who become our official final advisor. And so I'll bring back a little bit. One of these days, I would like to bring Professor Selig onto our show and let him talk about aerodynamics. I was very lucky to find him. He actually in his life had designed 120,000 airfoils. He is not a hypersonic expert, but I don't think archery projectile will ever go for 700 plus miles per hour. 300, maybe 350, I think we're going to max out. Then in other words, I'm thinking about 600 feet per second one of these days, which should be our limit. Then we're talking everything become impossible. 350, I can see it doing it. After that, it's a whole different ballgame. Now, that said, I think a lot of people do not understand how important Vane is and how detrimental it is to the modern archery. First of all, people don't understand in the longer range shooting, anything over 25 yards, your vane become more and more important. Anything under 20 yards you can shoot without the vane, it will fly pretty much the same. Because at that moment, the vane is not helping your arrow to recover. Because when your arrow go into the first initial flags, the whole parabolic action, which you call an archery paradox before you go into a tight elliptical spin, vane is not doing much except drag. It drag you down. See, with the modern vane, most of them are extruded. With the exception of quick spin, they are molded with texture and also shape in it. But then we need to understand how vane works. I mean, I'm very happy that when I first doing all this, I got quite a few friends helping me to do high speed, and we get some of the information, but some of them it just seems unreal because the number don't seem right. Then we finally find out that in most normal archery, the vane don't turn until it's about 5 to 7 feet in front of the bow. I mean, talking the normal vane, I don't care how much helical you put in it. That's the norm. And then you put offset, helicals. I mean, of course, straight vane would turn less. But then people say, oh, the vane turn left, and then the vane turn right. But then if you recall our episode about shaft, what you're really seeing is action and reaction from the torsion of the shaft, not from the vane. Usually those actions don't happen about 5 feet out, which means that your normal arrow do not take into the effect by the vane until 5 feet out. And then when the parabolic action recovered, now the vane is going to providing the rotational force to the arrow to give it the stability needed as you travel longer. But in the process of providing stability, you also drop energy as drag. And one of the most horrific thing about vanes when you hunt is that they make sound. Most people just do not know how loud vane is. I mean, vane is not that bad when you're shooting about 260, 270 feet per second. The moment you go above that, I learned this from Professor Selig, it's about a 7 cores of sound in aerodynamics. Vane got all of that. The more offset, the more helical you got, the worse it is. One of the number one thing is fluttering. So a lot of times you find out, this is easiest to find out how good your setup is. Get your buddy to shoot with you, go behind a barn and let him shoot past you. So in other words, 20 yards away from the shooting, and then let it pass you 10 yards away from you in front of the target. You will recognize how loud a vane is.
Dorge, can you explain something on, I touch on this a lot, would be Crosswind signature.
Oh yes, that was a good one.
That's a big deal because not only is it in terms of like accuracy, but also stability to the shaft, because when you have a greater crosswind signature, the shaft can become destabilized more in flight despite the accuracy end of it. You lose energy.
Oh no, that actually is about the worst condition that people don't understand, and they don't think of it. Everybody talk about how thin the arrow shaft is and so on. Remember, we are dealing with subsonic right now, which means that when an arrow at 250 feet per second, we're going to say 250, passing through the air, the action and reaction of the vane to the surrounding area. That means when an arrow passing through the air, how big is a disturbed air column? That's called a crosswind signature.
Okay.
So think about it. If you throw a spear of, say, finger thick into the air and passing through the air, the air that disturbed is going to be of the finger plus maybe 5 to 10%. In the case of a feather at 250 feet per second, when your arrow, if the arrow is not, assuming we're talking everything here, is not when the arrow is in the archery paradox, that feather will give you a crosswind signature about 5 inches. That means you got a column of air about 5 inches diameter. that's affected by that vane. The moment you go to a blazer about 300 feet per second, you're looking at about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. So in other words, if you got an arrow that's 166 with a blazer, and the arrow is 2764 with a blazer, the difference of the shaft and the crosswind signature is insignificant. Think about it. If it is 6 inch in diameter for the smallest, 6 inch plus 166 and 6 inch plus 2364. What are we talking here? That's the reason why I keep on trying to find out what the crosswind signature of a vane is. See, the crosswind signature is the action and reaction from the air encounter the vane, and the projected fluttering image of that entire column of air. People say the arrow past the air is not a big deal. They forgot one thing. We are shooting arrow at close to 200 miles per hour. The wind is blowing at 30 miles per hour across you. What you're dealing with is that column of air that affected the arrow flight. Because just like people say, well, you know, it's not really not a big deal. Talk to the truck drivers. For them, put the fin on the back of the truck. It's a 5 to 10% saving in fuel. We're talking continuous supply of power. When the arrow was shot, the power stopped. There's no additional energy. Any energy you take out of it is energy you lost, is energy less on the penetration end.
Now, a lot of people have the perceived idea that they don't even think about the vane. It's all about the shaft with the crosswind signature. And it's, let's shoot that 166 because that'll really minimize, the drift. When really the significant part is the vane that you're shooting.
Well, let me share experience with you. When I was shooting quick spin the very first time, I'm shooting an Indian XI. That tell you how old I am. I was shooting the first quote-unquote 4-inch quick spin with an 85 ring broadhead. I was shooting at a dope about 35 yards from me. The moment the arrow go forward, the moment the arrow caught the wind, the arrow goes sideways and slap the deer. I say, this is the latest and greatest vane on this planet. Until later I find out the crosswind signature of a quick spin is closer to 12 inches. When you got a 12-inch signature, that means now I've got a parachute at the back of the arrow that's about 12 inch in diameter with only an 85 ring leading. So the moment the wind catch it, that whole thing just flipped. That's where the crosswind signature is so critical. Now, blazer, I mean, to be fair, when I first saw blazer, I didn't understand it. And with the help of Professor Salick, I understand the micro texturing of the blazer is one of the most beneficiary of all modern vanes. Now, quick spin have tried to do something on that. Unfortunately, I don't think they get it right. That's the reason because the crosswind signature pretty much tell me how good and bad a vane is supposed to perform. Well, with our wind tunnel testing, we find out that, now, this is going to blow your mind. With the Aerovane 2 that we have, which is like this right here, this is a larger model of it since we're doing video. That's one of the vane in larger form. On a normal 246 shaft, the crosswind signature of this arrow going through the air, even at 400 feet per second, is about 1/4 inch from the tip of the vane. That's the size of the crosswind signature. And in the case of the Aerovane 3, because of winglet, and now anybody who have fly lately, winglet is one of the most misunderstood and now appreciated and money-saving features for all airplanes. As I will quote Delta, they saved $1.2 billion a year on fuel based on the winglet they add to all their planes.
Jeez.
They tell you.
Wow.
Now, in the case of the crosswind signature of Aerovane 3, the winglet plus 4 millimeter, that means this is the size of the crosswind signature you get with the Aerovane 3. In other words, when you talk vanes or wings or any form of feather, the moment you pass 260 feet per second, the crosswind signature become more and more critical.
Okay.
As you increase the speed, aerodynamic become the most important thing. As Dave did a lot of high-speed camera testing and research for me, we found out that the crosswind signature is so critical, which is why if you're able to find a broadhead or able to tune the bow correctly with this vane, we're talking at 130 yard, at 35 miles per hour wind, your arrow would not be a quarter to half inch off from where you aim.
With a broadhead?
No. Depends on the shape of the broadhead.
Okay.
Because see, when you say broadhead, everything goes out the window. Because now we need to save all this broadhead stuff in the broadhead section. Because you tell me, how many form and shape of broadhead out there, and you tell me they all the same? No. That's a rabbit hole so deep. It's not a freaking rabbit hole. It's a rabbit labyrinth.
So what are we to a point where we can talk about what led you to develop a vane?
Oh yes. First of all, I will tell you the history or the fun history. Of course.
Aerovane 1.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
many people realize that, but this is a 2, that's a 3.
Right.
There was an Aerovane 1, which is kind of comical.
Yeah. Well, I figured that, see, this is how the whole Aerovane feat come about. I mean, of course, that doe incident in Martino State Park is sort of like, this is bad.
Something's wrong.
No, something's totally wrong. This is supposed to guide the arrow, make it spin, and then you'll get perfect penetration deep. Now I got an arrow, slap the deer. No, I'm talking not aiming off. We're talking the arrow going sideways and whip, slap the deer on the side. Maybe, let me show you. It's slapping a deer this way. I was like, what just happened? But then I will talk about second incident, which is also lead me to it. I was hunting in Volleyball State Park, right in the entrance where the two, cross-country trail exit. I sit right there on the corner on that tree. 5 o'clock in the morning, waiting for sun up at 7, lean back. A small owl flies sideways like this and landed right here. I said, shit, that's no sound. And then it just go out. It looked at me weird. And go to this side, parked on this tree where my quiver is. Turn up at me and say, are you stupid? That kind of look. I said, damn, that thing moved without sound. My arrow was, because back then the quick swing, Now, to make things even worse, that afternoon I changed my spot, go to the backside of Volo Bog. I got the full black rack 10 point standing right here with a doe and fawn right here. I'm shooting going downhill. I'm exactly about 25 feet up because I know my tree lounge. I'm looking at deer playing and the snow is going this way. And I was just thinking about the incident. I said, if I shoot at that deer, I would slap it. I would never make it. It's 35 yards from me. I should have shoot it with absolutely zero problem.
Are you shooting a compound at this point?
At that moment, shooting a compound, believe me, I was shooting a Matthew Q2. That's how old it gets. The wind was drifting. The deer is here, the doe is here, and the fawn is here. If there is no wind, I I even go so far to shoot a musky glue on 4-blade. I know I'm not gonna make it. So after all this happened, I got a chance to work with Jeff Bailey, which is a very good friend of mine and the pro staff of Firenock. And you say, well, you know what? Let's go think about how to improve on Vane as all the boats are going 280 feet per second and up. Because at that moment, most people don't recognize it. They claim Q2 is shooting at 320 feet per second. Actuality, I'm lucky to get 280 out of it. Well, then I was thinking, okay, let's think about what we can do. Then I thought about everything, and then the sort of the inventiveness of me coming in. I said, okay, let's do an airfoil. And then we put a steering capability of plate on the back. So yes, if you look at an Aerovane 1, it's 2 loops on it. The first one is an airfoil. The second one is a guiding rudder.
What's an airfoil?
An airfoil is defined as a piece of material when one side have a longer air travel distance than the lower side.
Okay.
The difference of the two make that piece into an airfoil.
Okay.
So any piece of material that when the air passing through it, when it's straight, will cause the piece to lift. In other words, dealing with Brunetto principle. See the distance of, just like if you curve your hand, okay? This point to this point is the same distance. Mm-hmm. But the air have to go over this hump, which now have a longer travel. And the air from this point to this point is the same distance. The air is faster.
Sure.
So the faster side will now provide a force towards the slower side of air, would push over the faster side of air, cause this piece to go up. That's lift.
Okay.
Lift applied in any fluid, which means that boat we have lift. But water will have lift. So if you have a boat that is humped more on one side and strict on the other side, the boat will always go towards the hump side. Same thing with the airplane. The top of the airplane have a longer distance for the air to travel compared to lower. The moment I was thinking, well, this is pretty good way of doing it, because lift is a resulting force of air. Well, lo and behold, I mean, I built a wind tunnel test using 4 vacuums in a tube. I mean, it go crazy. We're talking 4 vacuums from a 4-inch tube to a 2-inch tube to a 1-inch tube to provide me an airspeed about close to 185 miles per hour. I still had that video on Waymo, I think. That's back in 2007. We found out the moment the air passing through it, there is no pressure on this part. So we put a pressure gauge on the end of the arrow. We're thinking that when you blow the air on it, there's going to be resistance, which is pushed towards the vane, right? Which means the vane is now going to apply the opposite pressure to the forward acceleration force. In the case of an airfoil, we see it minimum. But then at the same thing, instead using a circular lift process. No, let me step back. Let me tell people what circular lift process is. Most people, when you put vanes on a shaft, each of the vanes are offset. That means you are dragging each of the vane. The resulting of the multi-factor drag causes the arrow to rotate. But if I use every single vane here is a lift, which means when the air hit here, the lift force is going to be here. When you have 3 even lift, the arrow will rotate.
Okay.
So in other words, that becomes what you call circular lift. That terminology was not used anywhere because, see, airfoil have never been used, quote-unquote, causing rotation of any flying projectiles. Well, which, of course, that's the reason that I own the patent to airfoil-based rotation on arrows. And that means anything that utilizes airfoil to turn will be infringed on my patent, and which is the reason there's no other thing out there that using lift. Now, what's the benefit of lift? First of all, lift is a resulting of a process, a phenomenon, based on the Bernoulli principle. That means when the air travel on the longer distance and the shortened distance between a piece of material, the longer distance travel will receive the lift from the opposite side. When you have 3 of them together, it will turn. I say, well, lift doesn't sound like much. Just think about it. That is the reason we're able to fly today with airplanes. Think about how much force it required the airplane to fly against gravity. That's where airfoil is so wonderful.
Now, this process is what helps aerovane spin faster.
Ridiculously fast.
Yeah, and when you implement the concept system and stabilize the arrow and give it these lift characteristics, then we start to see benefits.
Oh, the benefits is phenomenal benefit. First of all, let me step back a little bit and sort of give you some idea what kind of rotation speed we're talking about. In case of feather and offset, a lot of times we're talking about 8 to 12 turns in the first 20 yards, with the first 5 to 6 feet of the arrow turning. That's how much turning a normal vane or feather-based projectile, up to about 280 feet per second. Anything over that, whatever offset of very helical you put on it, is useless. Because see, the more offset you put on, the more drag you got, the more the more dragging frontal force you need to make the arrow spin.
Okay.
But as the more you spin it, the more drag you got. So they're contradictory. So technically, if you look at a high-speed camera at any speed over 300 feet per second, I don't care how much offset, how much helical you put on the vane, and how long it is, you're only going to end up with 8 to 10 revolution every 20 yards. And the number will only go low from there. That means at 500 feet per second, you put a 2-degree offset at 60 or 80 yards, you're lucky to get 8 revolution every 20 yards.
Wow.
Why? Because at that moment, the drag factor is so serious. You will slow your aero down easily by 12 to 15% per 20 yards from the normal conditions. That means just on the drag factor alone. Now remember, we have other factors. We're talking drag factor only, from a no vane to with vane. When you start adding those, the number get ridiculous.
So aerovane uses lift.
Correct, for rotational lift.
What like the Blazer vane, like what does that use?
They're not. Well, I want to make a point here, and I think you'll agree that anything else as far as helical is not really a winglet, which your process, you're literally putting a wing on the arrow, which they need drag to induce.
In other words,
spin.
100% friction based.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you use friction based, now remember when you deal with friction, the entire piece of material, just like when you hold a piece of paper, you blow air on it. As long as they are reasonably parallel, you got that. Remember, when it's doing that, it's robbing energy, creating sound. The more offset you got, the more you get. Because remember, even when you put drag on it, the piece of material is parallel on both sides. The turbulence on one side to the other, which exists even in aerovane, but one is guided, the other is not. You got microsurface turbulence on both sides now.
Okay.
Which means that you got continuous drag on both sides. Now, let me go back to the original aerovane one. It's sort of funny what I did. I make the mold, put the airfoil in the front and the rudder in the back, and I go ahead and polish the mold to extreme by paying more money. The first time I got the vane and bring to Professor Selig, and he was holding my vane. He was touching the vane. He said, "Why is it so smooth?" I say, "So it can glide through the air." He looked at me and chuckled. "You know, you're flying, right?" "Yes." "It don't work in aerodynamics." What do you mean by don't work? He said, "The smoother the surface of an airfoil, the more it stick to the wind. It creates surface drag. That is 5 to 10 times of when you have texture on it."
Oh, wow.
You're actually adding friction.
It adds humongous amount of friction. Well,
That's
then you
pretty
say,
opposite of what you would
Dorge,
think.
That means every time you put smoothness on any airfoil, you killed it.
I think in the automotive industry, someone like the hoods on some of these cars actually designed the ripple to deflect wind, if that makes sense to some people.
Exactly. Now, truth is the same thing. Just like, of course, aerodynamics, most people don't go with that high speed. But the moment of the new sailboat, there's superb performance sailboat. They got the shark skin texture, right? That is to control the boundary layer separation. That is supposed so that the air cannot stick to it.
Okay.
You want air to grab on it so the air itself can become bobbling so the other can go over it. This is the reason why the first Blazer works so well, because it got micro texture on the vane compared to other companies. Some company, I don't think they really understand aerodynamics like me. So stupidly, when looked at, "Oh, it's so smooth." What are you thinking? Make it smooth, make it so you can fly faster. No, aerodynamic don't do it that way. So I try to point out that if you don't work with people who know the subject, even reasonably well-educated guy like me would make mistake like this. It sounds so stupid, it's not even funny. He say, just think about it. If you have a golf ball that's perfectly round, it won't even fly through. You'll go in and fly left and drop.
Golf ball's a great point. Yeah, because they're all like
All
pitted.
the dimples.
Correct. Yep. And just like sail, you don't want super smooth sail. You want a sail with ripples on it. That's pretty much the reason why vane is such a complicated subject. The more you understand what the vane does, the more you appreciate it. The ancient time when people throw a vane on it. But right now, with the speed that we're dealing with, anything... Now, let me start give you an idea of how aerodynamics kicked in. At 280 feet per second, that's way too much of the cutoff point, in my opinion. At least that's the testing we did. Vane is sort of okay. The moment it hit about 280, it starts showing its rear end. The moment you go into 280, Then you move up to all the way to about 315 feet per second. 315 feet per second is where it becomes critical, because that's where aerodynamics really become the dominant factor. Remember, the word dominant is critical here. Because see, in the old days, when you don't shoot over 280 feet per second, all the discussion of vane, shaft dynamics, and stuff like that don't matter. But the moment you pass 280, that becomes sort of important. At 315, it becomes the dominant factors. Which also explains why a lot of people, when they shoot the thin shaft with the heavy FOC, the moment they shoot those, when the arrow is recovering. Now remember, no matter what projectile we flies, Newton's second law applies. When the frontal part stays solid because there's so much mass in it, the shaft is going to flex irregularly because it's no longer the back node. Every time the shaft moves off its center point, the vane behaves like a fan on it. Now, what is your crosswind signature? No longer based on the vane alone, isn't it? Now your 6 inches become your 14, 15 inch.
That's significant.
And then what happened to your forward momentum? To make things worse, if you got a good vane, like 4-inch feather and that speed, that entire parachute effect, backward drag effect on the vane, will cause your arrow front to not hold true.
So we got the vanes over here. Maybe you should discuss on this. These are a higher speed rotational flight vane.
Yes.
Can you explain maybe just some of the difference between just say a Blazer vane, an AV2 vane, and an Aerovane 3 as far as spin at just say we'll just pick 350 feet per second.
Okay, good. The Aerovane 2 will start spinning 3 inch in front of the arrow of the bow. Now remember, I said Blazer at any offset at 350 feet per second, don't turn until it's 3 to 5 feet in front of the bow. Will give you 8 to 12 revolution for the first 20 yards. From 60 to 80 will give you 8 to 10 revolution. Aerovane 2 will start spinning at 3 to 4 inches to make the first rotational formation.
Sure.
It will do 60 to 90. In case of 350, what he said, you'll get 90 revolution in the first 20 yards. At 60 to 80, we're looking at about 120 revolution in that 60 to 80. In case of Aerovane 3, it's about just under 3 inch, more like 2.5 inch. Aerovane 3 will begin to rotate. The first 20 yards, we're looking at 90 revolution. At 350 feet per second, from 60 to 80 yards, is doing 300 plus revolution in every 20 yards. So wait a minute. That's 30 plus times more than a Blazer, or in the case of another thing, at 350 feet per second, if you shoot feather, the feather has zero effect because the feather will compress and the feather won't come back out until the arrow speed drop down to about 280 feet per second. Then the vane comes out, then will do its job.
Sure.
Because anything over there, the feather on normal condition, 100% collapse.
Sure.
So it's nothing more than a clump of material going through the air.
I think one thing to point out is these numbers are based on our arrow builds with a concept system. Had it not be, like I got a lot of guys that might want to put on Aerovane 3s, but it's on a standard arrow with, just insert. It might not be really well built, and it could actually work backwards, the process.
Oh, okay. Let me sort of show you numbers again. If you got a Bissenberger with a Boning Platinum Plus, putting 3 Blazer on an arrow. First of all, did anybody know that the Blazer is not 120 degree even? No, the Bissenberger is not 120 degree even.
I didn't know that.
When you rotate that 3, notice the third notch. The arrow actually flip like this way. Because the Bissenberger was designed to use on a Mako knock with a 2219. So the moment when you flip to the third one, the Mako knock with the space behind it, the arrow will flip this way. So right on the get-go, you are adding about 3 to 4 degree of off.
Yeah.
So that when you look at a Bissenberger index, it's not 120, 120, 120, but 120, 118, and 122. to help them. So if you use a Bissenberger to fletch your arrow, that's your first number off.
So that's a big no-no right out of the gate.
Well, remember, this is a circular lift. If I have that, that means the arrow, when they rotate, I don't have a center point in them anymore, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if this is 120, this is 118, this is 122, this arrow is going to rotate like this.
Sure.
Not this.
Yeah.
Now, next thing you know, if you use a Bissenberger with a ballooning Platinum Plus, which is a glue, on a 2-inch blazer, your per vane glue is between 0.8 to 1.5 grain of glue per vane.
Okay.
Now, think through it. That means every single vane have a 50% weight variance.
Sure.
And if you have weight that's not distributed correctly and you try to rotate it, what do you get? You got an off-center rotational. Then if the moment you increase spin speed, those become more and more critical. That's the reason why I come with aerovane in 2008. I have to make aerovane jig in 2009 because we just cannot get it to stick right or fly right. Remember, we're dealing with most guys who shoot normal bow. At that moment, most of the guys shoot 290 feet per second, considered speed bow, which is nowhere close to what we are doing in this crossbow. I mean, the actual fact is that you can shoot a 10.505 at 520 feet per second. What do you think the drag factor and the rotational factor of this is going to be?
Significant.
Exactly. It's to the point of ridiculous. Then how do you, maybe think about it, just on, let me sort of guide people who love the blazer, which I think is a fantastic vane. If the weight of the vane is critical, let me give you a hint of how off it is. If you shoot 2 blazer in clear and your cock vane is blazer American flag, do you know the weight difference?
No.
It's 100%.
Really?
Yes. It's 100% weight difference.
Some of the blazers are even shorter and longer.
Because they're die cut. Now, you need to understand when you deal with the blazer is an extruded die cut vane. That means you got a piece of material going through a die cut, going through extrusion process, and a die cutter is cutting that. That means how thick, how thin of that blazer is part of the process.
Yeah.
And when you start throwing paint, like American flag, tiger barb, and so on, that's weight.
Yeah.
But you also, since there's hot melt on it, you also create micro texture, uneven texture on each of those. So if you want an arrow to spin right, all 3 has to be 100% identical, even on drag. As you go higher and higher in speed, it becomes more and more critical.
Now, this spin rate going higher, can you explain what that has to do with, and probably going to be in relation to concept system? We're going to probably dive down the gyroscopic precession rabbit hole.
Yes.
Which I think is, I mean, that's really where the benefit of these vanes come in, is how we're getting this arrow downrange, not only quietly, but we start getting lift characteristics over the whole arrow.
Absolutely.
Before you answer that, can you, dumb down the benefit of more revolutions to...
That's where
Actually, the
going.
more revolution is not better if you shoot a specific luffed broadhead. Remember, all the broadhead, all the traditional broadhead, even the new generation broadhead, you need to look at the crosswind signature of that broadhead before you put a high-speed vane on it. That's the reason it is much easier to use ordinary vanes. Basically, you control the drag, which is known factor, onto a broadhead that's known. By not having rotation, that actually is much easier. Just like the first aerovane and aerovane 2. All my dealers who started this loved it until they put a broadhead on it. Because now the vane is trying to turn, the broadhead is trying to prevent it from turning. Now you got an arrow shaft that is connected to both ends. You got 2 masters with 1 slave. That's the reason aerovane is not for anybody, for most people, until they understand what they're looking for. The fact is that aerovane and concept arrows are really not needed by most until they pass the 280 feet per second mark. That's the reason most people don't recognize this. But then in the crossbow world, who shoot under 350 feet per second? No one.
Yeah.
Even the lowest, like R10 with the heavy weight, you still shoot over 350.
Sure.
Aerodynamic is a big deal. Now, let me talk about people who say, wait, when you rotate so much, wouldn't you lose energy? Remember, we are not using drag which is a continual loss of power. We're using lift. Lift is a resulting of a phenomenon that is think about it. If drag factor will work, one of the best examples, think about it. When you go to Cancun, play your parachute, and you go up in the air, that's based on drag. So that you push the air into the parachute put down, the air come down, you stay there. But that is a continuous input of power to keep you up there. So in case of a drag-based system, it's a continuous robbing of power. But in case of aerovane, it's a resulting of a phenomenon that is not a continuous robbing of power. Why do you think a glider can stay so long in air? Same deal. We're using the aerodynamic efficiency and the aerodynamic phenomenon to keep the aero spinning.
Now, I know there's some people out there that are, they're going to be like, if you spin the arrow faster, it's going to get worse. And I just want to make the point that because of the way we build the arrows with the concept system, we're able to stabilize the shaft to where when we do spin the arrow faster, it becomes beneficial instead of a hindrance.
When you spin an arrow to a certain speed, like in case of Aerovane 3, I'll just give you a rough thing before we go. This is how the arrow travels with a normal vane. This is how the arrow travels with the aerovanes. That means the moment you hit the pinnacle, the aerovane-based arrow at any distance will always hit the target perpendicularly. We're talking 150 to 200 yards. If you shoot an arrow at a target, remember in Olympic, everybody is like this, so the arrow can hit it. With aerovane-based arrow at any distance, yes, it's at any distance, the arrow hit the target perpendicularly.
Which is huge.
Yes. Think about it. If you are shooting an animal that's far away from you, say 90, 100 yards, you shoot heavy FOC, slow speed arrow. The arrow is coming out like this. The angle gets sharper and sharper. If you hit the animal straight like this, you've thought of aiming at the heart, you're going below the heart now.
Yep.
Because the animal at any time is going to stand straight. The animal going to lift slant itself this way.
And
even to shoot up and down.
Theoretically, it would probably get worse if you were in elevated
Correct.
position.
What's that do on crosswind signature too? Because now you have the crosswind signature. Not only do you have side drag, but now you have wind hitting you on this part of the shaft. You got all kinds of stuff happening that you didn't think of. So this eliminates a lot of it where you got point and minimal crosswind signature, which is like barely anything on the aerovanes compared to the others.
Sure.
But that lift, the way we're able to keep that up there, if we do this right, is it applies torque out to the end of the arrow. So we're able to keep it flat instead of have that dive down there. So that's where we're able to maintain the arrow being more horizontal.
Correct. The arrows are always maintained horizontal, which means your longer distance shot. Now, this is another part that a lot of people didn't recognize, which I didn't recognize too, because most arrow, when they calculate kinetic energy on impact, is based on mass times speed. What happens when you have rotational mass? It becomes an energy storage device that automatically, based on whatever formula you got, just adds 7 to 9% to the energy.
Because it's rotating so much.
Not just that, it's a rotational mass.
Sure, yeah.
Just like when you put a top together, the top only have that weight, but that rotation, for you to stop that,
I got you.
You need to overcome that energy.
Okay.
So the arrow is now storing the energy and maintaining the energy as it flies. So actually, the flying process is actually losing energy to the surrounding through flex of the arrow, through drag of the arrow, through parabolic section of the arrow shaft. All of those, in the case of arrowing with high rotation, with the arrow concept that you can force the arrow to have less parabolic action, that whole thing become a storage device. I mean, this gets so crazy, but the moment you understand why every single facet come together and play, now, which is also why, like in the Firenock Aeroboat G, at 100 yards, of course, yes, that's a high FOC design, but it's also an extremely high, low parabolic reaction. At 100 yards, it loses 2% energy.
Oh, my God.
No, it's not a joke. Just so you know, that's based on the calculation, excluding rotational mass.
So it's actually, if you include rotational mass, it would actually gain energy.
Yes.
In theory.
But people say, wait a minute, that sounds like it's over 100%. I say in most cases, when you push down to the arrow, the whole pushing process is energy loss. But there's an arrow going through the parabolic action that is losing energy. The arrow concept, and that is picking that up.
With the normal setup, how much energy is lost at that distance?
This is what we have done. Back in 2014, when Rod White was doing, based on his original broomstick project, we know that a 65% let-off bow at 60 yards in normal condition is 18% energy loss. That's the norm. The moment you go 80% let-off on the same shaft, is 38.
I'll give you an idea, and I'm not sure if we talked about this before on maybe one of the other podcasts, but when Rod did his video, he called it the boomstick, but it was a Rampage arrow, I think it was.
Yeah, the Rampage arrow with
concept system arrow, aerovanes. He tested it against all other match weight arrows, and at 50 yards, the boomstick arrow was going, I think it was 29 feet per second faster than all other arrows of the same weight. And it's like, sometimes when you first start telling people that, well, that can't be because the arrows, it's just physics.
Yeah.
But when I was doing some of my tests and I was realizing that, wow, these arrows are flying flatter, I would go on what's the archery target software on target?
On target,
on
yes.
target too. I think I dished that in a trash can because you couldn't use it. I had a boat at a time was shooting around 300 feet per second, and for me to get make sense out of the drop that I was getting, I think it was like 40 or 45 yards. I had to compute in a number of like 380, 385 feet per second to make it make sense.
Wow.
But remember, his boat is shooting 300 feet per second.
Yeah.
But the arrow was behaving like was flying at 380 feet per second at 50 yards.
I think that's a good point to make, is how these arrows carry.
Correct.
Versus when you go from a Blazer to AV2 to an AV3, then we circle on AV or Concept System 1 to 1.0 on how these handle downrange to the target. The further you get downrange, the more significant this becomes, because we're able to retain more energy from the bow. And I think we used this term before as ballistic launch coefficient. We're able to retain this and put it downrange where you need it, as to where when you look at the archery industry as a whole, all these sales points of the bow manufacturers, etc., they're all selling on launch speed. The bow does 350 feet per second out of the gates, when we're looking at it as, what's it doing downrange at 30, 40, 50, 60
Which is
yards?
what matters.
That's where the animal is, because nobody's really shooting at a deer right here. Right. I mean, there's probably that 0.02%,
sure.
But you're shooting a deer at 20, 30 yards. Some of the guys with our technology, the technology that we're putting
50,
to the bows,
60, 70.
they're starting to stretch their legs out, and they're seeing the benefits. No longer do we have to say that, or take that mentality that's been drained into us, that we have to be a 20-yard shooter.
Right.
Don't shoot a deer over 20, because that was told to me when I was a kid. And in a sense, that's correct based on that technology that we really haven't evolved on in arrows till Firenock.
Yeah, because when Dorge was shooting deer back then, he was slapping them with the arrow.
Right. Exactly. He had to try and knock the deer out versus shoot through it. There's a difference.
I see, this is where I think a lot of people really need to. I think hopefully the guys are really, with the good shooters would do that. They need to put their chronograph at 50 yards and let the arrow pass through it to see what the actual speed of the arrow is. Because people about two things, not just the speed. We need to look at when the arrow at 50 yards, is the arrow hitting target this way, or this way?
Sure.
And then the next thing we look at it, at this moment, when the target hit the arrow, how much it penetrates. Because see, remember, in most cases, the moment you change your field point profile, the penetration will change. Such reason, if you are old enough like me, you remember the days of when Satellite was making their Satellite Titan broadheads. What did they do? Number one thing, they give people broadhead tuning tips, which is about this long, 2-inch long. And that 2-inch long is where make the difference. Because the longer the broadhead, the higher the speed, the worse it gets.
And in terms of the swing blade, that's kind of like the reason why we came out with a mechanical, to be able to
benefit
handle with
Aerovane 3.
especially the Aerovane 3, because, there was a lot of guys, I want to shoot mechanicals with Aerovane 3, and we're like, well, you got to really try that, because it's odds are it's not going to happen, especially, 20, 30 yards you can get away with a lot. As soon as you start getting over 30 yards, well, you're going to find out what a bad broadhead is, how good it is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. That becomes very critical. Because, see, you, at that moment, you're not talking speed of the arrow. You're also talking about the torque of the arrow able to apply. Now you need to ask yourself, if I put a power drill on the back of my arrow, and when that broadhead hit the meat, what is that broadhead going to behave like if it's rotating high? Remember, we're not talking twice as high.
Yeah.
See, at 80 yards, a Blazer will give you 10 rotation, and Aerovane 3 will give you 300 revolution every 20 yards. I mean, until you actually see the result. I mean, the good thing is that Dave did enough high-speed test. Just like when we show the people on our our cook bottle, which is only 5-inch long. The Vane make 2 turns in that space.
Oh, my God. That's incredible.
I mean, you can't lie on a high-speed. We're not that good to doctor the ability of a high-speed camera yet.
I mean, I shot an arrow. It was a 2.0 concept system. At 445 grains, I think it was next to a 420 grain factory. The only thing that had Firenock on the factory arrow was the arrow point and the knock.
Okay.
And all the way down the range, starting at like 50, 100, and I ended at 120. But it would be significant. Actually, in the early stages, in I think it was like 20 or 25 yards, the heavier 2.0 system shot 2 inches lower, and this is all using the same crosshair. But at 50 yards, it made up 8 inches.
Oh, wow.
6 over the factory arrow. At the end of the day, when we got to 120 yards, that 2.0 system that was 25 grains heavier shot 24 inches higher than the factory arrow.
24 inches.
24 inches, and you got to ask yourself, not only do we got to have higher impact, it's flying better. So the overall dynamics of the arrow is just going to be better. You're going to hit harder. It's going to deliver more energy. We've got less effect when we start talking variable wind conditions, because you got to figure when you have most of the people when they go to sight in their boat, you're in like maybe the summertime, you're sighting in on that perfect day. There's no wind. Then you get to November, it's rut. You took that week off to go hunting. You're hunting.
Yep.
If it's 20-mile-an-hour wind,
you're in it.
You're in it, right? So the idea is that we want to get the arrow flying better and crosswind everything, downrange to the target, and to deliver maximum energy. And that's where we become more ethical. And the shot is what we're doing. That's ultimately what every hunter wants, is to have a better ethical shot for the animal.
Now, remember what Dave said is based on a 300 feet per second factory on the same length. The new arrow is Aero Concept 2.0 with Aerovane 3.
Well, that's crossbow, actually, that one.
Oh, that's
380 feet.
380 feet per second crossbow. Sorry, I was thinking you're shooting your blade.
No. That actually, that was, when I was first testing the 2.0 system in vertical bow, the 20-yard zero, which I could say just hit an egg with, if I use that pin at 45 yards, if I hold my form right, I'm dropping about 5 to 6 inches.
Okay.
That
which
means
is
if you aim at the top
significant.
of the deer,
Yeah.
We're talking, 5 to 6 inches is about the size of a deer's heart.
Yeah.
So with the discrepancy of that, you know how much guesswork that takes out for the hunter to say, do I put my 20-yard pin on it, my 30-yard pin on my 40? When I can just say, if you practice, your shooting ability is good enough, I'm going to take 0 to 40 on this pin.
Yeah, that's like, for us at Exodus, that's the biggest selling point on these arrows as deer hunters or elk hunters or whatever. Like, you have one pin from 0 to 40 yards, and you just shoot the deer.
Well, let me put this in perspective here. You're out there, the deer's at 25, the regular setup. You're going to put your 20-yard pin on it. You're allowing for a little bit of mistake on it. Deer walks another 4 or 5 strides all the way. He's at 32, and you're sitting there guessing, you're contemplating.
Yep.
You start making mistakes based on you thinking you're making mistakes.
Yeah.
And now we got a huge error, and maybe you're sitting in a tree with a little bit of wind that on top of your holdover, your Kentucky windage, you got a tree that's moving.
Yeah.
What do you do? So there's other mistakes over here that when you start adding these factors in, it's like, wow, there's a lot to consider. And if we can cut that down on the arrow end of it, it's shooing.
Yeah, the amount of opportunity that you're going to have is going to be exponentially better.
I mean, think about it. That was the deer I chased. Remember the big 10-point black point I talked about?
Oh, he'd be dead.
He would be dead, so dead.
I mean, just to give you an idea, Dorge then was shooting with equipment that archers would tell me, well, that's simple to understand equipment. That's easy. You guys got complicated stuff.
Uh-huh.
And it ends up being a logical fallacy because our complicated stuff is designed to make things
simpler.
Easier.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technology that goes into this. I mean, if it was that easy, Blazer would have been doing it before.
Right.
But what we have here is Dorge has got an extensive background, talks to the right people, and we're able to get stuff out there for shooters that they can have an easier time with shooting in the woods. All the technological stuff, we got it covered. We help educate people like this, and I think that's a key point.
Bit. Because a lot of people say, "Whoa, I want to use aerovane." No, don't do that. What the first thing you do is to educate yourself. What does the component system do? Mm-hmm. What does Vane do? What does Aero Concept 1 do? What does Insert do? What does Knock do? What does Fuel Point do? Understand that first. And I will tell people, I'll say, I built Aero for the last 30 years. Yep, you are telling me for the last 40 years you are a good carriage driver. You know how to service an electric vehicle?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what the boy down do.
Yeah.
I mean, just like me, I have to learn every single thing. Like when I come with aerovane, I thought that I could use Jojen, Bissenberger, I add tools to it. No, ain't gonna work.
I thought that too.
Until I put aerovane jig out. Then I figured, I would just get it done right. When Jim was sending me the 425 feet per second crossbow, nothing works. Then I had to come up with Aero Concept. Then arrow insert A, arrow insert H. I mean, as we start moving to like 470, when I see the 500 feet per second score put coming out, I say, oh my God, I need to do something about arrow shaft. Because like we talk about the arrow shaft capability, how the torsion, the parabolic action of the shaft and so on, everything of it become a problem. So now we have to do all of the above. And yes, I would say if you're really into it, get yourself a dealer that you can trust and let him guide you. If not, do a lot of studying. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying that treat it as fun. I mean, yes, you're going to get a lot of basic physics principle, but that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's key to all of this.
Yeah, that's the reason, when you're dealing with aerovane 2, aerovane 3, yes, a lot of people ask me, how come aerovane is always strict? I say, no. Aerovane need to be strict fletched as long as in aerovane 2 is 280 feet per second. Aerovane 3 is 260 feet per second. The moment you go below that speed, lift is no longer a possibility.
Sure.
That's the reason you offset aerovane 2 or aerovane 3 on speed that's lower, because at low speed, lift do not happen.
Okay.
You need to use drag.
Okay.
Which is offset, helical, you name it, you have to do that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is there anything else you want to cover? We're going on here on an hour.
I do. We do not iron these in. I have lots. How do you get them in there? I'll take an iron.
No,
put it in there.
You mean the
winglet.
The winglet.
Yeah.
Every piece, let me people know how serious this is. Every piece of aerovane 2 and every single piece of aerovane 3 is single cavity, single mode. That means every single vane I ever sold since day one for each of the vane come out of the same identical mold.
Yeah, it's huge.
One at a time.
That's huge.
Aerovane 2 have a weight variance of all colors, a 0.1 variance grain. Aerovane 3 is 0.06 grain.
Wow.
Even the glue process is like 0.03 or something, right?
No. If you use my jig and my glue, you actually put down 0.03 grain of glue per vane.
Okay.
And at 9 seconds, it takes 680 pounds to put it off.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, you can. you gotta cut it. I mean, you can sit there with pliers and try and yank them off. If you did the prep work right on it, glue it.
Yeah.
I mean, even in like 5 to 6 seconds, You're cutting it off.
I mean, Jim Burnsworth, when he was in my office a few years ago.
Video.
Yeah, he was trying to use it, pull it with a plier.
You'll rip the vane before you take it off the arrow.
Yeah. I have 6, 7 arrows out of my last dozen that are just lost the vane from shooting it.
Not with this. Now, a lot of people need to understand when they go to cold weather, this is one thing that a lot of people say, oh, Dorge, I shot a -4. I shot through an animal. Or the vane broke. I say, just think about it. If you fly an airplane into a forest, how many wings you got?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
When this thing going through an animal, remember, this is, no, you do not know that. I'm going to tell you that. This is based on 89 durometer plastic. This is an airfoil. It's hard. When you go toe temperature, when you fly through an animal, that shock is going to break this. It is not going to break it in flight, but it's going to break when you shoot through an animal.
Which
but
at
after
that point,
that, does it matter?
Right, at that point, the deer's dead, and you go buy a new arrow.
No, you just refletch it. Oh, you may not know, when you buy aerovane fletching jig, we have laser-guided system, could put the vane back within 1/16 of a degree.
Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, just put a new fletching on it.
Just refletch it.
It's a great system. It's a knowledge-based system, but it's the benefits. When you understand it and then go to shoot it, so much more helpful.
Yeah, I mean, as Jake always likes to say, any educated consumer is going to have a better experience.
Exactly.
And that's what this provides.
Very simple. I mean, just like gluing process. I mean, I said already, if you got a Bisonberger with a boning plantar plus, you're going to put 0.8 to 1.5 grain. We are putting 0.03 grain of glue on it.
Yeah, that's like nothing.
Look at the numbers.
Yeah.
1.5 over 0.03.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
That's 500%, 5,000% difference.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good spot to leave off. We've gone
Absolutely.
an hour here.
I mean, when you come on the YouTube, I think a lot of people got a lot of questions. I'll try my best to answer.
Sure. Yeah. This video will be on Firenock TV's YouTube channel. It'll also be on Exodus Trail Camera's YouTube channel. So
what's next?
Hopefully more veins, because I have more vein questions.
Definitely. I mean, the vein is a very complicated issue because people say, why can't I do this? Why can't I do this? Remember, it's like you think, oh, I've got a big best airfoil. So you can't put an F-16 airfoil on a Hercules and vice versa.
Sure.
The airfoil have to work with the fuselage. Think about it. Your shaft is your fuselage. This is your airfoil. It's your wings.
Yeah. Sounds good, guys. Well, we got to get ready for the show. Last day here. Been a long day.
It sure is.
Long week. So let's have a good show, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Yep.
All right. Good
See
to be
you.
here.